Palace of Babylon stood as a symbol of resilience and grandeur, its towering walls and gleaming spires rising above the city like a beacon of civilization amidst the harsh and unforgiving world. Inside, the halls were adorned with intricate mosaics, tapestries of rich colors, depicting the gods and heroes of old, their stories woven into the very fabric of the city's identity. The air was thick with the scent of incense, a heady mix of myrrh and frankincense that clung to the skin and filled the lungs with a sense of reverence. Ira had been summoned to the palace by Nabonidus, the king who had once fled for his life across the steppe, only to return and reclaim his throne thanks to Ira's intervention. Ira, the savior of Babylon, the man of fire and ice, had been granted many honors since that fateful day. But this invitation was different. There was a tension in the air, a sense of something more personal, more profound. As he walked through the palace halls, his footsteps echoing off the polished stone floors, Ira's thoughts were a tumultuous mix of curiosity and apprehension. He had faced many challenges in his life, battled enemies both human and otherworldly. But this was different. He could feel the weight of expectation pressing down on him, the eyes of the court upon him, judging, evaluating. Finally, he reached the doors of the royal chamber, massive and ornately carved with scenes of victory and triumph. Two guards, their expressions stoic and impassive, pushed open the doors, revealing the chamber beyond. Ira stepped inside, his gaze immediately drawn to the figure seated beside Nabonidus on a gilded throne. She was stunning, in a way that transcended mere physical beauty. Her presence was like the soft glow of autumn sunlight filtering through the leaves, warm and golden, yet tinged with a sadness that was almost palpable. Her eyes were the color of rich, burnished amber, deep and soulful, as though they held within them all the secrets of the world. They were the eyes of a woman who had seen much, felt much, and yet remained untouched by the world's cruelties. Her hair, a cascade of dark waves that shimmered like silk, framed her face in a halo of shadow and light. It fell in loose curls over her shoulders, brushing against the soft fabric of her gown, which clung to her figure with an effortless grace. The gown, woven from the finest materials, was the color of autumn leaves, a deep, rich red that contrasted beautifully with her fair skin. Her nose was delicate, perfectly proportioned, adding a touch of softness to her otherwise striking features. Her lips, full and rosy, were set in a gentle, contemplative curve, as though she were lost in thought, distant and unreachable. Her figure was slender, yet with a subtle, graceful strength, like a reed bending in the wind but never breaking. Every aspect of her appearance spoke of a quiet, ethereal beauty, a beauty that seemed almost unreal in its perfection. Ira's breath caught in his throat as he looked at her. This was Belshaltinana, the daughter of Nabonidus, the woman whom the king had decided would be his bride. Ira had faced many things in his life, but he had never been so affected by mere beauty. It was as though the world had narrowed to this single moment, to the sight of her sitting there, her gaze distant, her thoughts a mystery. Yet, as Ira stood there, captivated by her presence, he noticed something else, something that sent a shiver down his spine. Belshaltinana's eyes, those beautiful amber eyes, were filled not with warmth, but with a deep, abiding coldness. It was not the cold of malice or cruelty, but the cold of indifference, of a soul that had withdrawn from the world, retreating into a place where nothing could touch it. The conversation with Nabonidus, noticing Ira's reaction, rose from his throne and approached the young warrior with a smile that was both welcoming and paternal. The king was a man who had seen much in his life, and though the years had lined his face and grayed his hair, there was still a spark of vitality in his eyes, a determination that had carried him through the darkest of times. "Ira," Nabonidus said, his voice warm and full of affection, "you honor us with your presence. Please come closer." Ira nodded, tearing his gaze away from Belshaltinana with some effort, and stepped forward to meet the king. As he did, he could feel the weight of Belshaltinana's gaze upon him, though she made no move to acknowledge his presence. "Ira," Nabonidus continued, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder, You have done more for Babylon than anyone could have ever hoped for. You have saved our city, our people, and for that, we are eternally grateful. But I have called you here today for another reason, a more personal one. Ira inclined his head, listening intently as the king spoke. You see, Nabonidus said, his voice growing softer, I have only one daughter, Belshaltinana. She is my pride, my joy, and my greatest treasure. It has been my dream to see her married to a man of great honor and strength, a man who can protect her and stand by her side as a true partner. And when I look at you, Ira, I see that man. Ira's heart began to race as the full meaning of Nabonidus's words sank in. He had suspected that this might be the reason for his summons, but hearing it spoken aloud was something else entirely. Your Majesty, Ira began, his voice carefully measured. I am deeply honored by your words and by the trust you place in me. But marriage, love, these are things that cannot be decided by duty alone. They must come from the heart. Nabonidus's expression softened, his eyes filled with a fatherly kindness. I understand your concerns, Ira, and you are right. Love cannot be forced. But I have seen the way my daughter looks at the world, and I know that she needs someone like you to bring her back to it. She has grown distant, cold, and I fear that she will choose a life of solitude if someone does not reach out to her. Ira glanced at Belshaltinana, who still sat motionless on her throne, her gaze distant, her thoughts inscrutable. She was a vision of beauty, but there was a sadness in her that Ira could not ignore, a sadness that spoke of a deep disconnection from the world around her. Your Majesty, Ira said carefully, I do not wish to force your daughter into anything she does not want. If she chooses a life of solitude, then I would respect that choice. Love must be mutual, and I would never seek to bind her to me if her heart is not in it. Nabonidus sighed, his expression one of resignation. You are a good man, Ira. I knew that when I first met you, and you have only proven it to me time and again. Perhaps you could speak with her. Try to understand what she truly wants. If there is no hope, then I will not press the matter further. Ira nodded, understanding the weight of what was being asked of him. I will speak with her, Your Majesty, but I cannot promise that it will change anything. That is all I ask, Nabonidus said with a weary smile. Thank you, Ira. The conversation with Belshaltinana. Later that evening, Ira found himself standing in the gardens of the palace, where the scent of jasmine and roses mingled with the cool night air. The sky above was a deep, inky blue, dotted with stars that seemed to shimmer like distant, unreachable dreams. The palace gardens were a place of tranquility, a refuge from the cares of the world, and it was here that Ira waited for Belshaltinana, unsure of what he would say to her. When she finally appeared, her figure moving gracefully through the shadows, Ira's breath caught in his throat once more. She was even more stunning in the moonlight, her beauty almost otherworldly, as though she were a goddess walking among mortals. But her expression was as distant as ever, her amber eyes filled with that same cold indifference. Belshaltinana, Ira said softly as she approached, his voice barely more than a whisper. Thank you for meeting with me. Belshaltinana nodded, but said nothing. She stood before him, her hands clasped in front of her, her gaze fixed on a point just beyond Ira's shoulder, as though she were looking at something only she could see. I wanted to speak with you, Ira continued, choosing his words carefully, about your father's wishes. He has asked me to marry you. Belshaltinana's gaze flickered, but she did not respond, her expression remaining calm and unreadable. I must admit, Ira said, his voice faltering slightly, that I am deeply moved by your beauty, and I am honored by your father's proposal. But I also know that love cannot be one-sided. If you do not wish to marry me, if your heart lies elsewhere, then I would never seek to force you into something you do not want. Finally, Belshaltinana spoke, her voice as soft as the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Ira, you are a man of great honor and strength. My father admires you greatly, and I can see why. But my heart is not here. Ira felt a pang of sadness at her words, though he had expected them. Then where is your heart, Belshaltinana? What is it that you seek? She turned her gaze to the sky, her eyes reflecting the distant stars. I seek peace, Ira. I seek a life of contemplation, of devotion. My heart longs for the solitude of the temple, for the quiet that can only be found in the service of the gods. I do not wish to be a wife, to be bound by the duties of marriage. My path lies elsewhere. Ira nodded, understanding the depth of her conviction. I see, and I respect that, Belshaltinana. Your wishes are your own, and I would never seek to take them from you. But your father, he is concerned for you. He fears that you have withdrawn too far from the world, that you have become lost in your own thoughts. Belshaltinana smiled faintly, though there was little warmth in it. My father loves me, Ira, but he does not understand me. He sees my solitude as a burden, a sign of sorrow. But to me, it is a blessing, a path to enlightenment. I do not wish to be pulled back into the world, not even for the sake of his love. Ira looked at her, feeling a deep admiration for the strength of her resolve, even as he felt the sadness of knowing that her heart would never belong to him. Then I will tell him, Ira said gently. I will tell him that your path is your own, and that it is not one that I can walk with you. Thank you, Ira, Belshaltinana replied, her voice sincere. You are a kind man, and I am grateful for your understanding. Ira bowed his head, acknowledging her words. May the gods watch over you, Belshaltinana, wherever your path may lead, and may they watch over you as well, Ira, she replied, before turning and walking away, her figure disappearing into the shadows of the garden. The final conversation with Nabonidus. The next morning, Ira met with Nabonidus in the king's private chambers, where the light of the early sun streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the floor. The king was seated at a large wooden table, a map of Babylon spread out before him, though his attention was clearly elsewhere. Ira approached quietly, unsure of how to begin. When Nabonidus looked up, his expression was one of quiet anticipation, as though he already knew what Ira was about to say. Ira, Nabonidus said, his voice heavy with the weight of his own concerns. What did she say? Ira took a deep breath before answering, his tone gentle but firm. She said that her heart is not in marriage, your majesty. She wishes to devote herself to the gods, to live a life of contemplation and solitude. She does not wish to marry me, or anyone else. Nabonidus closed his eyes for a moment, a sigh escaping his lips as he leaned back in his chair. I feared as much, he murmured. She has always been so distant, so unreachable. I thought that perhaps you could bring her back to us, to help her find her way in this world. Ira stepped closer, his voice filled with quiet conviction. Your Majesty, Belshaltinana has found her way. It is not the path you would have chosen for her, but it is the path she has chosen for herself. And I believe that we must respect that, even if it is difficult. Nabonidus opened his eyes, his gaze filled with a mixture of sadness and resignation. You are right, Ira. You are right, as always. I only wanted what was best for her, but I see now that I cannot force her to be something she is not. Ira nodded, feeling the weight of the king's sorrow. She is a remarkable woman, your majesty. Strong, independent, and wise beyond her years. She will find her peace, in her own way. Nabonidus smiled faintly, though it did not reach his eyes. Thank you, Ira. You have been a true friend to me, and to my daughter. I only hope that one day, she will understand the depth of my love for her. She knows, Ira said gently, and she loves you in her own way. But she must walk her own path. Nabonidus nodded, his expression filled with a weary acceptance. Yes, she must, and I will let her. But it is a hard thing, to let go of one's child. Ira placed a hand on the king's shoulder, offering what comfort he could. She will find her way, your majesty, and she will always be your daughter, no matter where her path leads. Nabonidus sighed again, but this time, there was a hint of peace in it. Thank you, Ira. You have given me much to think about. With that, Ira took his leave, walking away from the king's chambers with a heavy heart. He had not found the love he had hoped for, but he had found something else, an understanding of the importance of letting go, of allowing others to find their own way, even when it was difficult. And as he walked through the halls of the palace, the voice in his head was silent. The questions that had plagued him for so long finally at rest. For now, at least, Ira had found a measure of peace, even in the coldness that still lingered in his heart.